Caleb Morgan thought he was just helping a homeless woman change her tire on a freezing night. But Ruth Delgado wasn't who she seemed. She secretly owned a billion-dollar company. What started as a simple act of kindness in a snowy church parking lot pulls Caleb into Ruth's hidden world and into a fight for the future of Maple Ridge. When ugly rumors spread and the town turns against them, trust shatters and everything they've built is at risk. Now, the truth could save the town or destroy it. What happens when the woman you helped can change everything, but staying might cost you everything too? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The freezing wind cut through the church parking lot like sharp knives of ice. Caleb Morgan's breath formed little clouds in the air as he stepped out of his truck, pulling his collar up against the cold. The day's work at the auto shop still clung to his hands, traces of motor oil that never quite washed away, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Through the swirling snow, he spotted a figure hunched over by a sedan's rear tire. The sight tugged at something familiar in him, that mix of duty and compassion that had guided him through his years as an Army medic. Without hesitation, he changed direction, boots crunching on the fresh snow. "Need a hand there?" he called out, keeping his voice gentle to avoid startling her. The woman straightened up, clutching a tire iron. Her coat had seen better days, and her backpack looked like it had traveled more miles than it was meant to. Dark eyes studied him carefully from beneath strands of wind-blown hair. "I've almost got it," she said, but her trembling hands told a different story. The lug nuts hadn't budged an inch. "I'm Caleb. I run the night shift at Morgan's Auto just down the road." He gestured toward the shop's sign, barely visible through the snow. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Ruth," she offered simply, stepping back. Caleb knelt by the tire, immediately spotting the problem. "These lug nuts are on pretty tight. Sometimes they need a bit more leverage." He positioned the tire iron, using his weight to break the first nut loose. "How long have you been out here?" 20 minutes, maybe?" Ruth wrapped her arms around herself, shivering visibly now. Without thinking, Caleb shrugged off his wool hat. Sarah's hat, really. His late wife had knitted it herself, choosing the softest yarn she could find. He'd worn it every winter since she passed. "Here," he said, holding it out to Ruth. "You look like you could use this more than me right now." Ruth started to protest, but another gust of wind made her reconsider. She accepted the hat with careful hands, pulling it down over her ears. "Thank you," she murmured, the words almost lost in the wind. Working efficiently, Caleb removed the flat tire and checked the spare. His practiced eye caught signs of wear that concerned him. "This spare's seen some miles. It'll get you to a motel, but I wouldn't trust it much further than that." Through the church's stained glass windows, warm light spilled out along with the sound of children's voices raised in song. The choir was finishing up. "There's a budget motel just up the road," Caleb said, tightening the last lug nut. "Simple place, but clean. You probably passed it on your way into town." Ruth nodded, fishing in her backpack for a wallet. "I remember seeing it. Thank you for your help. I can manage from here." The church doors opened, releasing a burst of warmth and song into the night. Lily bounded down the steps, her sheet music clutched to her chest, choir folder flapping in the wind. "Dad!" she called out, then noticed Ruth. Her smile grew wider. "Hi, were you here for choir practice too?" "Just had a flat tire," Ruth explained, something softening in her expression as she watched Lily approach. "Your dad was kind enough to help." "That's what he does," Lily said matter-of-factly, pride clear in her voice. "He fixes things for people all the time." Caleb felt his ears grow warm despite the cold. "Come on, sweetie. We should let Ruth get going before this snow gets worse." He turned to Ruth. "You sure you're all set?" "Yes. I'll head to that motel you mentioned." She started to remove the hat, but Caleb waved her off. "Keep it for now. It's still a cold night." At the motel's front desk, Caleb couldn't help noticing Ruth in line ahead of them. He'd followed at a distance, wanting to make sure she made it safely. When her credit card was declined, she tried not to show her dismay, but Caleb saw the slight tremor in her hands as she dug through her backpack. "Add it to my tab, Jerry," Caleb called out to the clerk, stepping forward. "Room 112 opened up today, right? That's the one with the better heater." Ruth turned, startled. "No, please, you've already done too much. It's just one night," Caleb said quietly. "And it's going to drop below freezing." Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Dad, can we get her some hot chocolate from the vending machine too? The kind with the little marshmallows?" Ruth's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She blinked them back quickly, but not before Caleb noticed. "That's very thoughtful, Lily," he said, pulling some change from his pocket. While Lily skipped off to the vending machine, Caleb handled the room payment quietly with Jerry. "I don't know how to thank you," Ruth said softly, accepting the key. "No thanks needed. Just—" Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "Just pass it on when you can." Lily returned with the hot chocolate, presenting it to Ruth with a beaming smile. "It helps with the cold," she explained seriously. "Dad always gets it for me after choir practice." Ruth accepted the warm cup with both hands. "Thank you, Lily. That's very kind." As Caleb and Lily headed for the door, Ruth stood in the lobby, watching them through the window. Her fingers touched the wool hat lightly, feeling its soft warmth as their truck pulled away into the swirling snow. Morning frost coated the motel windows as Caleb pulled into the parking lot. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting long shadows across the empty spaces. He grabbed the thermos of coffee from his passenger seat, its warmth seeping through his work gloves. Room 112's curtains were already open, light spilling out into the dim morning. Caleb hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was overstepping, but the memory of Ruth's shivering form in the church parking lot pushed him forward. He knocked softly on the door. "Ruth?" "It's Caleb Morgan from last night." The door opened, revealing Ruth already dressed in the same worn coat. The wool hat sat neatly folded on the small table behind her. "Good morning," she said, surprise clear in her voice. "I thought you might need this." He held up the thermos. "The motel coffee isn't exactly known for its quality." Ruth's face softened with a genuine smile. "That's incredibly thoughtful. Would you like to come in for a minute?" "It's freezing out there." The room was neat, with a small laptop open on the table and papers spread around it. Ruth cleared a space, gesturing for him to sit. "I hope you got some rest," Caleb said, pouring the coffee into the thermos cap that doubled as a cup. "That heater can be temperamental." "It worked fine," Ruth assured him, accepting the coffee. "I can't thank you enough for last night. The room, the hat." She took a sip, and her eyebrows rose. "And now perfect coffee." "It's nothing fancy, just the blend we keep at the shop. Mechanics run on coffee and stubbornness, mostly." Ruth laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. "I know some tech engineers who operate on the same fuel." Before Caleb could respond, the rumble of a powerful engine cut through the morning quiet. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up directly outside the room. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a crisp suit stepped out, his movements precise and controlled. "Ms. Delgado," the man called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I've been trying to reach you." Ruth set down her coffee, her posture shifting subtly. "I'm fine, Tobias. My phone died last night." Caleb looked between them, pieces clicking into place. The laptop, the papers, the way Ruth carried herself, his elf. There was more here than met the eye. Tobias entered the room, his gaze sweeping over Caleb with practiced assessment. "We need to discuss the schedule changes. The board is expecting updates on site selections by noon." "Site selections?" Caleb asked before he could stop himself. Ruth sighed, straightening her shoulders. "I suppose proper introductions are in order. I'm Ruth Delgado, founder and CEO of Delglo Dynamics." She gestured to Tobias. This is Tobias Reed, my head of security and operations. Caleb blinked, recognition dawning. Dell Glow Dynamics was a household name in clean energy manufacturing. Their solar components were revolutionizing the industry. You're not actually passing through town, are you? He asked. No, Ruth admitted. We're evaluating potential locations for a new manufacturing facility. I prefer to get a feel for communities. Quietly. Without the media circus that usually follows Ms. Delgado, Tobias added, his tone protective. Which is why we need to discuss security protocols. Ruth reached for her purse. Let me at least reimburse you for the room and your trouble. No, Caleb said firmly, surprising himself and Tobias. That wasn't why I helped. Nevertheless, Ruth began. Tell you what, Caleb interrupted, standing up. If you want to repay me, come to choir on Sunday. The kids have been working on something special, and kindness likes witnesses. Tobias frowned, but Ruth's face lit up with unexpected delight. Choir practice? At First Hope? 10 o'clock service. Lily would love to see you there. Caleb headed for the door, already running late for his shift. Keep the hat until then. Looks like we're in for more cold weather. Mr. Morgan, Tobias called after him, following him outside. A moment? Caleb stopped by his truck. Just Caleb is fine. You understand, this is unusual. Ms. Delgado's privacy and security are paramount. I'm not looking for anything, Mr. Reed. Sometimes a flat tire is just a flat tire. Tobias studied him for a long moment. We've had people try to take advantage before. The press especially likes to twist acts of kindness into PR stunts. Then they're missing the point of kindness, Caleb said simply. He climbed into his truck, the familiar smell of motor oil and coffee welcoming him. Sunday at 10, if you're interested. The coffee hour after service has pretty good donuts too. As he drove away, he caught a glimpse of Ruth in his rearview mirror. She stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching him leave. Tobias was already on his phone, probably running a background check. Back in room 112, Ruth settled at the small table, the wool hat soft between her fingers. Her laptop glowed with an open browser, the search results for Maple Ridge Choir filling the screen. A photo from last year's Christmas program showed Caleb and Lily, both grinning widely, matching Santa hats slightly askew on their heads. The background check will be done within the hour, Tobias reported, closing the door behind him. Ruth nodded, her eyes still on the photo. The same gentle kindness she'd experienced last night was there in Caleb's captured smile, genuine and unaware of the camera. He doesn't know who I am, she said softly, more to herself than Tobias. He just helped. That's what concerns me, Tobias replied. No one is that genuinely. Nice? Ruth finished, finally looking up at him. Maybe that's exactly what we're looking for in a community, Tobias. Maybe that's exactly what I needed to see. The wool hat sat between them on the table, a simple gift given without expectation of return, while outside, the morning sun finally broke through the frost. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Caleb's truck pulled into the First Hope Church parking lot. The old brick building stood warm against the winter chill, its stained glass windows catching the light. Lily bounced in her seat, already unclipping her seatbelt before they came to a full stop. Easy there, Caleb said, smiling at her enthusiasm. The notes aren't going anywhere, but people will start arriving soon. Lily clutched her handmade paper slips close to her chest. She'd spent Saturday evening carefully writing each one, her tongue poking out in concentration. They crunched across the salted walkway, their Sunday shoes leaving fresh prints in the dusting of snow. Inside, the church hummed with pre-service activity. The organist practiced scales, and the smell of coffee drifted from the fellowship hall. "Morning, Pastor Dan," Lily called out, waving to the gentle-faced minister arranging hymnals. "Good morning, Miss Lily. More good news for us today?" She nodded earnestly, already moving toward the first pew. Caleb watched as she began her weekly ritual, tucking notes carefully into hymnals and between the wooden slats. Each one carried the same message in her careful schoolgirl writing, "If you're reading this, you matter today." The sanctuary filled slowly as regulars filtered in, shaking off the cold. Caleb helped Mrs. Peterson with her heavy coat, nodding to the veterans who always sat together near the front. He was hanging up his own jacket when movement at the back door caught his eye. Ruth slipped in quietly, still wearing her worn coat but with his wife's wool hat tucked in the pocket. She chose a spot in the last pew, trying to blend into the shadows. If he hadn't been looking, he might have missed her entirely. Evelyn Carter, her silver hair neatly styled, noticed the newcomer immediately. The retired schoolteacher had a gift for spotting people who needed welcome. She made her way to Ruth's pew with the grace of someone who'd spent decades managing choir rooms and classrooms. "I don't believe we've met," Evelyn said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Evelyn Carter." "Ruth," came the quiet reply. "Just Ruth." "Well, just Ruth." Evelyn's eyes twinkled. "Would you like to sit with me? The acoustics are better in the middle section, and I always enjoy having someone to share hymns with." Caleb watched as Ruth hesitated, then gathered her things to follow Evelyn. Something in the older woman's manner seemed to put her at ease. They settled into a pew near where Lily was still distributing her notes. The service moved through its familiar rhythm. Lily joined the children's choir for their anthem, her clear voice rising with the others. Caleb noticed Ruth watching intently, her fingers moving slightly with the music. During collection, Ruth's eyes fell on the simple wooden box near the altar labeled Winter Heat Fund. Her expression shifted, something personal and painful crossing her face before disappearing behind her careful mask. After the final hymn, the congregation moved toward the fellowship hall for coffee hour. Ruth tried to slip away, but Evelyn's gentle hand on her arm stopped her. "You simply must try Betty's cranberry muffins," Evelyn insisted. "They're better than prayer for warming the spirit." The fellowship hall buzzed with conversation and laughter. Ruth found herself drawn into Evelyn's orbit, introduced to a steady stream of people who treated her presence as perfectly natural. Caleb noticed her shoulders gradually relaxing, her smile becoming more genuine. When the crowd thinned slightly, Ruth made her way back to the sanctuary. Caleb pretended not to notice as she approached the Winter Heat Fund box, discreetly slipping an envelope inside. Lily appeared at Ruth's side, startling her slightly. "This one's special," she said, holding out one of her notes. "I wrote it just for you." Ruth took the paper carefully, as if handling something precious. Her eyes softened as she read whatever message Lily had written. She folded it gently and tucked it into her coat pocket alongside the wool hat. "Thank you," she whispered to Lily. "I'll keep it safe." As the congregation dispersed into the snowy morning, Caleb caught up with Ruth on the front steps. The winter air had turned her cheeks pink above her collar. "You came," he said simply. "I did." Ruth adjusted her backpack strap. "The music was beautiful. Lily has quite a voice. She gets that from her mother." The words came easily, without the usual ache. Across the street, a black SUV idled quietly, Tobias a watchful presence behind the wheel. Ruth glanced that way briefly but seemed in no hurry to leave. "Your daughter's notes," she said. "They're quite something. She started writing them after Sarah, my wife, passed. Said everyone needs reminding they matter, especially on hard days." Ruth nodded, her hand touching the pocket where Lily's note rested. "She's right about that." The Maple Ridge Town Hall's meeting room buzzed with anticipation. Old radiators clanked against the winter chill as residents filled the wooden chairs, their coats draped over seatbacks. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the worn linoleum floor. Caleb settled into a middle row, nodding to fellow veterans he recognized from the VFW hall. His prepared notes felt heavy in his jacket pocket, statistics about unemployment rates among local vets, ideas for training programs. He'd rehearsed his speech during his lunch break at the auto shop. Mayor Whitman stood at the podium, straightening his tie. His polished appearance contrasted sharply with the working-class crowd. "Let's bring this meeting to order," he announced, tapping his gavel. "Tonight's main agenda item, discussing potential investors for the old Mason manufacturing facility." From his seat, Caleb noticed Ruth slip through the back door. She chose a corner spot, still wearing that threadbare coat, looking more like someone who'd wandered in from the cold than a potential investor. A few people glanced her way, then quickly dismissed her presence. The mayor launched into his presentation, complete with colorful charts showing projected job growth. "We've had interest from several parties," he said, his voice carrying that practiced political warmth, "but we need to be selective. We can't rush into partnerships that might not align with our community's values." Caleb raised his hand during the public comment period. Standing, he cleared his throat. "There are 37 veterans in Maple Ridge currently looking for full-time work. The old plant could provide—" "Yes, yes." Mayor Whitman cut in smoothly. "We're certainly mindful of our veterans' needs." Next speaker? A few others shared concerns about environmental impact and training costs. Then Ruth's hand went up. The mayor nodded absently, probably expecting another local resident's comment. "What specific safety protocols would you require from potential operators?" Her question was precise, technical. "And what's your target wage scale for entry-level positions?" The mayor's practiced smile flickered. "I'm sorry, you are?" "Just someone interested in sustainable job creation." Ruth's voice remained steady. "Your previous factory closed after multiple OSHA violations. How would you prevent that pattern from repeating?" Mayor Whitman's face tightened. "Ma'am, we appreciate your concern, but these are complex matters. We're not looking for outside criticism. We're not a charity case, and frankly, we've had trouble before with outsiders trying to tell us how to run our town." An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb watched Ruth's expression, not angry, just contemplative. That's when Tobias stood up from his seat near the door. His precise movements and sharp suit suddenly commanded attention. "Mr. Mayor, allow me to introduce Ruth Delgado, founder and CEO of Delglo Dynamics. We're here exploring potential locations for our new manufacturing facility." The room went silent. Then came the gasps of recognition. People turned in their seats, staring at Ruth with new eyes. Someone whispered, "The Ruth Delgado? The billionaire?" The mayor's face paled slightly. "Ms. Delgado, I had no idea." Clearly, Ruth stood, her worn coat and backpack now a stark statement rather than a disguise. "I've spent the past few days getting to know Maple Ridge. Beautiful town, strong sense of community. But before Delglo commits to any location, we need to know it can embrace a truly diverse workforce." She moved to the center aisle, her quiet authority filling the room. "We pay living wages, we provide comprehensive benefits, we hire veterans, single parents, people of color, immigrants with work permits, we invest in training. The question isn't whether we'll bring jobs, it's whether Maple Ridge is ready to welcome the people who'll fill them." The silence stretched. Caleb watched faces in the crowd, hope warring with uncertainty, excitement mixing with fear of change. The mayor seemed frozen, his usual smooth responses abandoned. After the meeting adjourned, people clustered in small groups, their excited chatter filling the hall. Ruth found Caleb near the coat rack. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For helping me the other night, for not treating me differently before you knew who I was." Caleb shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "I still won't." Outside, the snow was falling harder now, big flakes catching in the streetlights. Small groups of townspeople huddled on the sidewalk, some faces bright with possibility, others drawn with concern. The wind carried fragments of their conversations, hopes about new jobs mixing with whispered doubts about change. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Caleb pulled into the church parking lot. Steam rose from his coffee thermos while he unloaded boxes of basic tools from his trunk. The church hall's lights were already on, casting a warm glow through frosted windows. Inside, folding tables lined the walls, each station equipped with different training materials. Ruth stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, her business attire a stark contrast to her previous worn coat. She'd traded the backpack for a leather portfolio, but her expression remained cautiously neutral. "Morning," Caleb said, setting down his toolbox. "Ready for day one?" "As ready as we'll get." Ruth checked her watch. People should start arriving soon. Evelyn bustled through, arms full of workbooks. "Coffee's brewing in the kitchen," she called out, "and I've got the literacy corner all set up." Monique Harris arrived next, carrying a stack of first aid mannequins. Her nurse's scrubs were still fresh from her night shift at the hospital. "Let me help you with those," Caleb offered, taking some of the load. "Thanks," Monique smiled tiredly. "Wasn't sure I'd make it, but wouldn't miss this for anything." The first workshop participants trickled in hesitantly. A group of veterans clustered near the door, some wearing their old service caps. A few immigrant families arrived together, speaking softly in different languages. Single mothers hurried in after dropping kids at school, their faces showing equal parts hope and worry. Lily burst through the door, her backpack bouncing. "Dad, I brought the coffee cart." She decorated her little red wagon with paper flowers, turning it into a makeshift refreshment station. "That's my girl." Caleb helped her arrange coffee cups and cookies. She immediately started making rounds, offering drinks to everyone with a bright smile that seemed to ease the room's tension. Ruth stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here." Her voice carried naturally, drawing attention. "This is a 30-day program. You'll receive stipends for attending, and more importantly, you'll refresh skills that matter. The only requirement is showing up ready to learn." The crowd shifted, some people exchanging uncertain glances. Ruth continued, "We have 3 main stations today: basic auto mechanics with Caleb Morgan, first aid certification with Nurse Harris, and literacy skills with Mrs. Carter. Choose where you'd like to start." Slowly, people began moving toward different areas. Caleb found himself surrounded by a mix of faces, young, old, different skin colors, various accents. He pulled out a carburetor, holding it up. "All right, folks, let's start with something basic but essential. Who can tell me what this does?" A young woman in a hijab raised her hand. "It mixes air and fuel for the engine, yes?" "Exactly right." Caleb smiled encouragingly. "Have you worked on cars before?" "In Syria with my father, but here," she shrugged. "No one will hire me without American certification." Across the room, Monique demonstrated proper CPR technique, while Evelyn helped a veteran with reading comprehension exercises. The initial awkwardness began to dissolve as people focused on their tasks. Lily wove between the stations, leaving her signature "good news" notes. She tucked them into toolboxes, taped them to mannequins, slipped them between workbook pages. "You're doing great," one read. "Every try counts," said another. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had shifted. People who'd arrived separately were working in pairs, helping each other. A retired mechanic showed a single mom how to check oil levels. A young immigrant taught a veteran a shortcut for remembering valve positions. Ruth moved quietly through the hall, observing. She paused near Caleb's station, watching him patiently explain timing belts to an elderly woman. "See here?" He pointed to the belt's teeth. "These need to line up just so." Like when the choir all starts singing at the same moment, the woman's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, like keeping time in music." "Exactly." Caleb noticed Ruth watching and gave her a quick nod. She returned it with the smallest smile before moving on. Monique's first aid station had turned into an impromptu story-sharing session. As she demonstrated bandaging techniques, people swapped tales of minor injuries and home remedies from their various cultures. "In my country," one man said, wrapping gauze around his partner's arm, "we use honey for wounds." "My grandmother did that too," someone else chimed in. "In Mississippi, growing up." Evelyn's literacy corner buzzed with quiet determination. A young mother sounded out words while her preschooler colored nearby. Two elderly men helped each other with computer basics, their laughter carrying across the room when they finally managed to send an email. The morning melted into afternoon. Lily continued her coffee rounds, now accompanied by a small group of kids whose parents were in the workshops. They'd turned it into a game, seeing who could deliver drinks the fastest without spilling. As the session wound down, people lingered, exchanging phone numbers and making plans to practice together. The elderly woman from Caleb's group was teaching another participant a hymn. The Syrian mechanic had 3 job interviews lined up through connections she'd made. When the last participants filed out, Ruth stood in the doorway, watching them leave. Her usual guarded expression had softened slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Caleb gathered his tools while Lily collected her scattered good news notes. His chest felt lighter than it had in years, reminded of why he'd loved teaching at the auto shop before grief had narrowed his world. "Ready to head home, kiddo?" he asked Lily. "Can we come back tomorrow?" She was practically bouncing with excitement. "Every day this month," he promised, leading her to the car. The setting sun painted the snow pink and orange as they pulled out of the parking lot. Through his rearview mirror, Caleb caught a last glimpse of Ruth standing in the church doorway, still watching the last workshop attendees disappear into the winter evening, that slight smile lingering on her face. Frost crystals sparkled like tiny diamonds on the Riverwalk's iron railings. The setting sun painted the frozen Maple River in shades of amber and rose. Caleb stood outside Pete's diner, watching his breath form clouds in the crisp evening air. His hands were tucked deep in his coat pockets, one finger nervously tracing the edge of his wallet. The diner's bell chimed as Ruth pushed through the door. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the worn coat and backpack, she looked both more and less like herself. "Sorry I'm late," she said, adjusting her scarf. "Had to finish some calls." "No problem. Thanks for coming." Caleb held the door, and warmth from the diner wrapped around them. Pete's was quiet this time of evening, just a few regulars nursing coffee at the counter. Sally, the longtime waitress, waved them to a corner booth overlooking the river. The vinyl seats creaked as they settled in. "Best view in town," Caleb said, gesturing to the window. "And the best pie, too." Sally appeared with 2 coffee mugs. "Apples fresh out of the oven," she announced. "Want a slice?" "Make it 2, Caleb said. When Sally left, he turned back to Ruth. "So, how's the workshop going from your end?" "Better than expected." Ruth wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "The skill levels are impressive. Just needed a chance to shine." They fell into easy conversation about the participants, the Syrian mechanic who'd already landed an interview, the veteran teaching computer basics to others. Ruth's face softened when she talked about them, her usual corporate mask slipping. Sally returned with 2 steaming plates of pie, the crust golden and flaky. "Enjoy, you two." Ruth took a bite and closed her eyes. "Oh, this is dangerous knowledge, knowing where to find pie this good." "Town's best-kept secret," Caleb agreed. "Well, one of them anyway." A comfortable silence settled as they ate. Outside, the last rays of sun faded, leaving the river a ribbon of darkness decorated with reflected streetlights. Ruth set down her fork. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you become a nurse?" "Monique mentioned you were in training before." Caleb's hand tightened around his coffee mug. He stared out at the river for a long moment. "Sarah, my wife, got sick during my first semester, aggressive cancer." His voice grew quiet. Everything else just stopped. Ruth didn't speak, just listened. "After she passed, Lily needed me. The auto shop offered steady hours, decent pay. The nursing dream felt selfish somehow." "It's not selfish," Ruth said softly. "Helping people never is." Caleb managed a small smile. "Maybe someday. What about you?" "The headlines paint quite a picture." Ruth's expression clouded. "Ah, yes. The ruthless CEO, the cold-hearted corporate raider." She stirred her coffee absently. Nobody writes about the 16-year-old sleeping in bus stations, or the community college classes I took while working 3 jobs. Must be lonely, Caleb said, being seen as a headline instead of a person. It is. Ruth reached into her wallet and pulled out a folded paper. That's why I kept this. She smoothed it out, one of Lily's good news notes from the church. Sometimes we all need reminding that we matter. She has a way of seeing people, Caleb said proudly. Gets that from her mother. And her father, Ruth added, meeting his eyes. The diner's bell chimed. Tobias entered, scanning the room before approaching their booth. Ms. Delgado. It's getting late. Ruth checked her watch and sighed. My watchdog. Always punctual. She gathered her things. Thank you for the pie, Caleb. And the company. Any time. He stood as she slid out of the booth. Be careful walking back. She will be, Tobias said firmly, his protective instincts evident in his stance. Ruth rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Good night, Caleb. He watched through the window as Tobias escorted her along the riverwalk, their figures growing smaller in the darkness. Ruth's laugh from earlier echoed in his mind. Genuine, unguarded, warm. In her motel room, Ruth stood at the window, looking out at the river's dark flow. The good news note sat unfolded on the desk beside her. Streetlights reflected off the water like scattered stars, and, for the first time in years, the view didn't feel temporary. She pressed her fingers against the cool glass, watching her breath fog the pain, and wondered when Maple Ridge had started feeling less like a business prospect and more like somewhere she could belong. Saturday morning light streamed through the church hall windows, warming the wood-paneled walls. Workshop participants filed in, filling the metal folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. The air hummed with curious whispers and the scent of fresh coffee from the back table. Ruth stood near the front, dressed in a simple blue blazer, looking more like herself but somehow still approachable. Caleb sat between Evelyn and Monique in the first row, watching people settle in. Lily perched on a chair near the coffee station, her notebook open on her lap. Thank you all for coming, Ruth began, her voice carrying easily across the room. Over these past weeks, I've seen something remarkable here. Not just skills being refreshed, but community being strengthened. She moved to a covered easel beside her. When I first came to Maple Ridge, I was looking for a business location. What I found was something far more valuable. People who help strangers simply because they're neighbors. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cloth covering the easel. That's why I'm excited to share this with you first. She pulled the cover away, revealing architectural renderings of a gleaming facility. Meet Maple Light Works. Gasps rippled through the room. The drawings showed a modern complex, with solar panels and green spaces, nothing like the grim factory that had closed years ago. This won't just be another plant, Ruth continued, flipping through the pages. It will be a center for green energy innovation, producing next-generation solar components. But more importantly, it will be a place that puts people first. She detailed the plans, living wages starting at twice the minimum, comprehensive health care, flexible scheduling. When she mentioned on-site childcare, several single parents wiped away tears. For our veterans, Ruth nodded toward the group of former service members, we're creating a dedicated apprenticeship program. Your experience and discipline are exactly what we need. Caleb felt his chest tighten as he watched his workshop students straighten in their chairs, pride replacing worry on their faces. And because this community's future matters, Ruth smiled at Lily, we're establishing the Maple Ridge Youth Science Scholarship. Each year, local students can apply for funding for community-focused science projects. Lily's pencil flew across her notebook, her eyes shining. Evelyn reached over and squeezed Caleb's hand. This isn't charity, Ruth emphasized. It's investment, in people, in potential, in the belief that success shouldn't mean leaving anyone behind. Questions flowed for the next hour. Ruth answered each one directly, her corporate polish softened by genuine enthusiasm. The room buzzed with growing excitement. As the meeting wound down, people lingered in small groups, talking animatedly about possibilities. Monique discussed healthcare plans with interested families. Evelyn gathered contact information for training programs. The afternoon flowed into evening, and the church slowly filled for a special choir performance. Ruth sat in her usual back pew, but this time Tobias joined her, his usual stern expression softened by the atmosphere. Evelyn took her place at the piano as the choir assembled. "Tonight," she announced, "we're debuting a new piece." The music was written by our own Lily Morgan, with words from her Good News' notes. Lily stood with the adult choir members, her small frame nearly vibrating with excitement. As Evelyn's fingers touched the keys, the first notes rose clear and sweet. In the frost of winter mornings, when hope seems far away, one kindness lights a candle that warms the breaking day. The harmony swelled, voices weaving together like threads of gold. Ruth found herself blinking back tears as the lyrics spoke of neighbors helping neighbors, of light passing from hand to hand. Caleb watched his daughter sing, her face glowing with joy. The words she'd scattered around town in tiny notes now filled the church, carried on dozens of voices. He glanced back at Ruth and caught her watching him. The final verse soared to the rafters. "For every heart that's hurting, for every dream that's new, the light we share together will always guide us through." As the last note hung in the air, suspended like a star, Caleb and Ruth's eyes met across the space. In that moment, all the possibilities stretched before them. The factory rising from empty ground, new jobs bringing life back to quiet streets, children's laughter in the daycare, veterans finding purpose again. But there was something else too, an unspoken current of understanding between them. They'd started with a flat tire in a dark parking lot, and now they stood at the edge of transforming an entire town. The joy of that knowledge mingled with the weight of responsibility, creating a complex emotion neither could quite name. The congregation's applause broke the moment. Lily bounced down from the choir risers, accepting hugs and congratulations. Ruth remained in her pew, one hand pressed to her heart, while Caleb stood with his arm around his daughter, both of them knowing that Maple Ridge would never be quite the same after tonight. The morning air bit cold and sharp as Caleb pulled into the auto shop parking lot. His headlights caught a familiar black SUV, and his stomach tightened. Tobias Reed stood by the shop's front door, shoulders rigid beneath his dark coat. "Mr. Morgan," Tobias said, his voice clipped, "we need to talk." Caleb unlocked the shop, flicking on the fluorescent lights that hummed to life overhead. The familiar smell of motor oil and rubber usually brought comfort, but today it felt oppressive. "Have you seen it?" Tobias pulled out his phone, thumb swiping across the screen. "Seen what?" Tobias held out the phone. On the screen was a grainy photo, clearly taken from a distance. It showed Caleb and Tobias in the church parking lot last week, and there, clear as day, was what appeared to be Tobias passing Caleb an envelope. The image had hundreds of shares. "That was the choir program," Caleb said, his mouth going dry. "You were handing me the folded program sheets for Sunday?" "I know that," Tobias replied grimly, "but someone's edited this to make it look like a payoff." The lighting, the angle, they knew exactly what they were doing. Before Caleb could respond, his own phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn, "Turn on the local news, now." Caleb grabbed the small TV they kept in the break room for slow days. Mayor Whitman's face filled the screen, standing at a podium outside City Hall. Deeply concerned about the integrity of this proposed development, the mayor was saying, his voice carrying that practiced note of regret. If certain individuals have been secretly compensated to influence public opinion, the citizens of Maple Ridge deserve to know. "He's not saying my name," Caleb muttered, "but everyone will know who he means." "Ms. Delgado is already aware," Tobias said. "She's meeting with her legal team this morning." Caleb's phone kept buzzing. Text messages, social media notifications, missed calls. He switched it off. The morning crawled by in a fog. Regular customers came in, some avoiding his eyes, others offering awkward smiles. Around 10, Pastor Dan called. "You need to come down to the church," he said heavily. "Someone's been here." Caleb found the pastor standing before the heavy wooden doors of First Hope Church. Bright red spray paint spelled out, "Go home," across the ancient oak. Pastor Dan had already started scrubbing, but the paint had settled into the grain. "This isn't just about you," Pastor Dan said quietly. "Someone threw rocks through Monique's clinic window last night, too." Caleb's hands clenched. "Monique? Is she okay?" "Physically, yes. But this morning." Pastor Dan hesitated. A patient's son refused to let her treat his father, made some ugly comments about her kind taking over the town. They worked in silence, trying to lift the paint from the wood. Church members stopped by, some helping, others just standing witness. Mrs. Chen from the diner brought them coffee, her eyes red. "They destroyed our suspended pie board," she said, hands trembling around her thermos. "All those prepaid meals for folks in need, just smashed it right off the wall." By early afternoon, Caleb's phone had hundreds of notifications. He finally turned it back on to check on Lily. A text from Ruth waited at the top. "I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Meeting with the investment committee at 3. We'll call you after." The call never came. Instead, Evelyn phoned around dinner time. "She's halting everything," Evelyn said, her voice thick. "The workshop, the factory plans, all of it. Tobias says she's worried about making things worse." "Worse?" Caleb sank into his kitchen chair. "How can it get worse?" "The mayor's calling for a town hall meeting tomorrow. Says we need to reevaluate our relationship with outside investors. You know what that means." Caleb did know. It meant the same old fear of change, dressed up in careful words about community values and traditional approaches. "What about Monique?" he asked. "She's staying with me tonight. Some folks from church are taking turns watching her clinic." Evelyn paused. "Caleb, what do we do?" He didn't have an answer. After hanging up, Caleb sat at his kitchen table, staring at nothing. The house felt too quiet. Upstairs, Lily slept, unaware that her scholarship dreams had likely died today. The choir program, the one from that damning photo, lay on the table, its edges worn from being folded and unfolded. His fingers found the wool hat in his jacket pocket. He'd meant to return it to Ruth, but now what? Was kindness just an invitation for trouble? Every time he'd reached out, tried to help, it seemed to backfire. First with his late wife's illness, when all his medical knowledge couldn't save her. Now this. The kitchen clock ticked heavily in the silence. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, and Caleb flinched, wondering if more vandals were roaming the streets. He thought of Monique at Evelyn's house, of Mrs. Chen sweeping up the broken pieces of her giving board, of Ruth retreating behind corporate walls to protect herself from the very community she'd tried to help. One act of kindness on a snowy night had sparked all this. One moment of seeing someone who needed help and stopping to give it. And now, Caleb sat alone at his table, the weight of consequences pressing down like a physical thing, wondering if he'd been naive to think that simple decency could change anything at all. The church had never felt so hollow. Caleb's footsteps echoed through the silent hallway as he approached the choir room. Usually by this time voices would be warming up, sheet music rustling, piano keys testing notes. But tonight only silence greeted him. He pushed open the familiar wooden door. The sight made his chest tighten. 3 people sat scattered among the empty chairs, Mrs. Peterson at the piano, young Tommy from the tenor section, and Evelyn, who looked up with tired eyes. "Where is everyone?" Caleb asked, though he already knew. Evelyn shook her head. "Called in sick, or their kids had homework, or she didn't finish." They both understood. People were choosing sides. The walls, usually plastered with Lily's colorful good news notes, stood bare. A few scraps of tape remained, like scars on the pale paint. Caleb touched one of these spots, remembering how just days ago this room had buzzed with hope. "Ruth left this for you," Evelyn said quietly, holding out a folded piece of paper. Her hand trembled slightly. Caleb took it, noting the precise handwriting. "Evelyn, please tell Caleb I'm sorry for the trouble I've brought to his door. I'll be leaving at dawn. It's better this way. She can't just leave," Caleb said, more to himself than anyone. "Can you blame her?" Evelyn settled into her usual chair, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. "This town. We showed our worst face. Those vandals, the whispers, that horrible thing with Monique." Mrs. Peterson played a soft, meandering melody on the piano, something sad and unresolved. Tommy fidgeted with his sheet music, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "Maybe we should cancel practice," the boy suggested. "No," Evelyn said firmly. "We'll sing with who's here. Music matters most when hearts are heavy." They tried. 4 voices where there should have been 20. The harmony felt thin, incomplete. After 30 minutes of struggling through familiar hymns, even Evelyn admitted defeat. "Go home," she told them gently. "Pray about what kind of town we want to be." Caleb drove home slowly, taking the long route past Ruth's motel. Her room's light was on, a warm square in the dark building. He imagined her packing that worn backpack, the one that had fooled him into thinking she was homeless. The thought of her leaving made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since losing Sarah. At home, Lily was already asleep at her grandmother's house. They'd decided it was better, given everything happening. The empty house pressed in around him. He paced from kitchen to living room and back, the wood floors creaking beneath his feet. On his third pass through the kitchen, he stopped at the drawer where Sarah used to keep important papers. Inside, beneath old warranties and instruction manuals, lay the nurse school application he'd never submitted after she got sick. He'd been so close to changing his life then, just like the town was so close to changing now. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. Caleb wore a path in his carpet, debating what to do. If he let Ruth leave, the town would go back to normal. But what kind of normal was worth keeping? If he tried to stop her, well, hadn't he done enough damage already? In her motel room, Ruth methodically folded clothes into her backpack. The same backpack that had once held everything she owned, back when she really was homeless. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Tobias about travel arrangements. Private jet fueled and ready. Security detail in place. Everything efficient, sterile, safe. She caught her reflection in the window, still wearing the clothes she'd chosen to blend in. Simple jeans, worn boots. The disguise that had become surprisingly comfortable. The wool hat sat on the bedside table. She should return it to Caleb before leaving. It was his wife's, after all. But something made her hesitate every time she reached for it. Her laptop glowed with dozens of open tabs, news articles about Maple Ridge's economic struggles, statistics about veteran unemployment, research on diverse workplace initiatives. She'd really thought she could help, that maybe this time would be different. Ruth unplugged her laptop charger, coiling it carefully. Her fingers brushed against Lily's good news note, still tucked in her wallet. "If you're reading this, you matter today." The paper had softened from being unfolded and refolded so many times. The clock blinked 3:17 a.m. In a few hours, she'd be gone. Back to boardrooms and business suits. Back to being Ms. Delgado instead of just Ruth. Back to safety. So why did it feel like running? Caleb stepped out onto his front porch, the pre-dawn air sharp in his lungs. Frost sparkled on the railing. Across town, Ruth's motel room light still glowed, a beacon in the gray darkness. He gripped the porch railing, jaw clenching as he made his decision. Dawn broke cold and clear over Maple Ridge. Caleb's phone buzzed just as he finished his first cup of coffee. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen. "Come to the VFW hall," she said without preamble. "Now." 20 minutes later, Caleb pulled into the Veterans of Foreign Wars parking lot. His throat tightened at the sight of familiar cars, Pastor Dan's ancient pickup, Monique's sensible sedan, and at least a dozen others. What struck him most was Mrs. Peterson's minivan, still sporting the choir mom sticker his late wife had given her years ago. Inside, the old hall hummed with quiet energy. Veterans in their service caps sat alongside choir members in winter coats. Some faces he recognized from the workshops, others from church. Evelyn stood at the front, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through dusty windows. "Good, you're here," she said, motioning him forward. In her hands, she held something small, one of Lily's good news notes, creased and worn from handling. "What's this about?" Caleb asked, scanning the room. Nearly 40 people filled the metal folding chairs, their breath visible in the chilly air. Evelyn held up the paper. "Your daughter," she said, "has more wisdom than all of us put together." Her voice carried clear and strong as she read, "One kindness is louder than one lie." The words hung in the air. Caleb recognized the note. It was the smallest one Lily had ever written, barely larger than a fortune cookie slip. "She's right." Pastor Dan stood up, his Vietnam veteran's cap set firmly on his gray hair. "And we've been too quiet. I have something to show you all," the pastor continued, pulling out his phone. "As you know, I wear a body camera during evening services. Safety protocol after the break-ins last year." He pressed play on a video. The footage showed the moment Tobias had handed Caleb the supposed envelope. Clear as day, it was just the folded choir program. They watched as Caleb immediately shared it with Lily, both of them studying the music notes. "That's not all," Monique spoke up from her seat. "Remember that family that refused my care at the clinic? I visited them yesterday. Their son was scared and angry. His own wife is fighting cancer. Fear makes people lash out." She squared her shoulders. "This morning, I'm going back to pray with them." One by one, people began standing, sharing ideas. Mrs. Peterson offered her van to drive elderly residents to appointments. Tommy, from the tenor section, volunteered his scout troop to repaint the church door. Mr. Garcia, who owned the diner, promised to not just replace the suspended pie board, but to match every donation. "We're not just fixing things," Evelyn declared. "We're showing who we really are, one kindness at a time." They divided into teams. Some headed to the hardware store for paint and supplies. Others went to call neighbors who'd stopped coming to choir. Monique left for her prayer meeting, head held high. Pastor Dan pulled Caleb aside as people filed out. "I'm posting the video on the town website," he said. "Truth needs sunshine to grow." By mid-morning, the church door gleamed with fresh paint, every trace of hatred covered in warm brown. The diner's new suspended pie board overflowed with paid-forward kindness. Cars lined up at the grocery store as people bought extra supplies to share. Caleb found himself swept along in the wave of goodwill. He helped Mr. Wilson jumpstart his car, then gave Mrs. Chen a ride to her doctor's appointment. Each small act felt like pushing back against the darkness that had threatened to swallow their town. At the clinic, Monique emerged from her meeting with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of reconciliation. The family had apologized, and she had listened. Together, they had found common ground in their shared humanity. Throughout the day, phones buzzed with updates and photos. The hardware store owner offering free ice melt to seniors, choir members caroling at the nursing home, veterans organizing a rideshare program for job interviews. Each picture showed faces transformed by purpose rather than suspicion. In her motel room, Ruth sat cross-legged on the bed, her packed bags forgotten by the door. Her phone kept lighting up with new notifications, not from her usual business contacts, but from the town's community page. She scrolled through image after image. The freshly painted church door, the overflowing pie board, Monique embracing the family who had rejected her. Each photo showed what she had almost convinced herself didn't exist anymore: genuine, unselfish kindness. A new picture appeared. Lily, standing on tiptoe to hang a fresh good news note. The caption read, "The smallest voice can speak the biggest truth." Ruth's fingers traced the screen. Something in her chest, something that had been wound tight for so long, began to loosen. She thought of her own words to Caleb that first night. "I'm just passing through." Now watching this town rise up with such grace, she wasn't so sure. Her packed bags sat by the door, waiting. The morning light stretched across the carpet, marking time's passage. Ruth kept scrolling, unable to look away from the faces of people choosing hope over hurt, kindness over fear. The wool hat still lay on her bedside table, a silent witness to her indecision. The morning light painted Maple Ridge's main street in shades of gold. Pop-up tents dotted the sidewalks, and folding tables lined the town square. Hand-lettered signs advertised free services: oil changes here, resume help, clothing repairs, and computer fix-it station. Caleb and Lily worked together, setting up their tire change station in front of the auto shop. Lily's artistic touch showed in their cardboard sign, decorated with colorful markers. "We help strangers because we're neighbors." She had drawn little hearts around the edges and added a smiling tire in the corner. "Think we'll get any takers, Dad?" Lily arranged their tools neatly on a red mechanic's mat. "Already have one," Caleb pointed to Mrs. Chen's old Corolla pulling up, "and look who's helping today." 3 veterans from his workshop days approached, toolboxes in hand. "Thought you could use some extra hands," said Mike, his Vietnam War cap sitting proud on his gray hair. The morning bustled with activity. At the diner, Mr. Garcia had set up tables outside, serving free coffee and his famous apple pie. The library steps hosted resume workshops, with volunteers helping job seekers update their applications. Outside the fabric store, a row of sewing machines hummed as locals mended clothes and blankets. Evelyn moved through the crowd like a conductor, coordinating efforts and directing people to where help was needed. Her clipboard contained a growing list of matches: skills offered, needs met, connections made. Near the church steps, Monique had organized a basic health screening station. The family that had once refused her care now worked alongside her, helping elderly residents check their blood pressure. Ruth stood at the edge of the square, watching. She wore her worn coat still, but something in her posture had changed. Her eyes tracked each interaction, each smile, each moment of connection. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Evelyn appeared beside her, eyes twinkling. "I've never seen anything like it," Ruth admitted softly. "Oh, but you have." Evelyn touched her arm. "You lived it once, didn't you? When someone helped you?" Ruth's breath caught. Across the square, she watched Caleb showing a teenage boy how to properly position a jack under a car. His patience, his gentle instruction, it sparked a memory so sharp it made her chest ache. "Come with me," Evelyn said, leading Ruth toward the temporary stage set up for announcements. The crowd's attention shifted as Evelyn took the microphone. "Friends," she called out, "we have someone here who'd like to share something." Ruth stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the mic. The familiar weight of her past pressed against her throat, but looking out at these faces, faces that had chosen kindness over suspicion, gave her courage. 23 years ago, she began, her voice growing stronger, I was 16 and homeless. One night my old car got a flat tire outside a diner, much like Garcia's. She paused, gathering herself. A stranger stopped. He changed my tire, bought me dinner, and gave me his business card. Said to call if I needed work. The square had gone quiet. Even the sewing machines had stilled. That man gave me my first job, minimum wage, sweeping floors at his machine shop, but he also let me study the manuals after hours. Taught me about motors and circuits. Ruth's eyes found Caleb's in the crowd. He saw me as a person, not a problem. She gestured to the bustling square. I came to Maple Ridge, wondering if that kind of town still existed, where people help first and ask questions later, where kindness isn't a transaction, her voice wavered. You just showed me it does. Applause rippled through the crowd, but Tobias's raised hand quieted them. He stepped onto the stage, his usual stern expression softened. There's something else you should know, he said clearly. That anonymous donation to the church's heating fund that everyone's been talking about? It wasn't Ms. Delgado's first gift. He pulled out his phone, displaying bank records. Caleb Morgan had been paying into that fund all winter, working overtime at the shop. His donation came in before Ruth ever arrived. The crowd turned to Caleb, who stood with his arm around Lily's shoulders, face reddening. Just seemed the right thing to do, he mumbled. Ruth stared at him, tears threatening. Their first kindness hadn't been his helping her. It had been them both, unknowingly, helping others. She touched the wool hat she still carried in her pocket, understanding blooming in her heart. The applause this time was deafening. Lily bounced on her toes, beaming up at her father. Veterans clapped him on the back. Mrs. Chen hugged him, speaking rapid Mandarin that needed no translation. Caleb just shrugged, already turning back to his work. But when his eyes met Ruth's across the square, something electric passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of how a simple act of kindness could echo far beyond its origins. The day continued, humming with purpose. Cars lined up for maintenance checks, sewing machines whirred back to life, resume workshops filled with hopeful faces, and through it all, Ruth watched as this small town proved that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of grace. Snow drifted lazily from pearl-gray skies as crowds gathered outside the newly renovated Maple Lightworks building. The old factory's brick walls gleamed, scrubbed clean, and fitted with gleaming solar panels. A wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance, fluttering in the December breeze. Veterans in pressed uniforms stood at attention, their medals catching the winter light. Beside them, the First Hope Church Children's Choir arranged themselves in neat rows, their breath visible in little puffs of white. Lily Morgan, wearing her favorite blue winter coat, bounced on her toes between them, clutching a rolled-up science project poster. Ruth Delgado stepped up to the podium, her business attire a stark change from the worn coat of her first days in Maple Ridge. But her smile held the same warmth as she addressed the crowd. A month ago, this building was empty. Today it represents something more than just jobs or clean energy. It represents what happens when a community chooses to see the best in each other. She gestured to the veterans. Our first hiring wave includes 15 veterans through our apprenticeship program. Applause rippled through the crowd. And thanks to our partnership with the nursing college, employees can earn while they learn. Caleb stood near the back, his auto shop coveralls exchanged for a warm jacket. His textbooks for next semester's nursing classes waited in his truck. When Ruth caught his eye, her smile softened for just a moment before she continued. But perhaps our proudest announcement today is our first Young Innovators Scholarship recipient. Ruth waved Lily forward. Miss Morgan, would you like to show everyone your project? Lily unrolled her poster, revealing detailed drawings of a small device. It's a solar-powered hand warmer, she explained, her clear voice carrying across the hushed crowd. For people who need to stay outside in the cold, like crossing guards or people waiting for the bus. It stores sunshine to keep hands warm later. And thanks to Maple Lightworks engineering team, Ruth added, Lily's design will be our first community production project. Every shelter in the county will receive a supply before winter's end. The ribbon cutting itself was a community affair. The oldest veteran and youngest choir member held the giant scissors together while cameras flashed and cheers erupted. Inside, the factory floor hummed with new equipment, and training stations were already set up for the afternoon's first orientation session. Later that evening, the church hall buzzed with conversation as tables groaned under potluck dishes. The smell of Mrs. Garcia's tamales mingled with Evelyn's famous chicken casserole. Veterans sat shoulder to shoulder with new hires, sharing stories and passing plates. Caleb helped Lily load her plate with mac and cheese before finding seats near the window. Ruth approached their table, carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. "May I join you?" she asked, though her usual confidence wavered slightly. "Always room for one more," Caleb replied, sliding over. Ruth set the package on the table. "I have something that belongs to you." She pushed it toward Caleb. "Though it's been modified a bit." Caleb unwrapped the tissue paper carefully. Inside lay his late wife's wool hat, cleaned and carefully mended. But when he turned it over, he found a small tag sewn into the brim. In elegant embroidery, it read, "Mercy Warms." His throat tightened as he ran his thumb over the stitching. "Sarah would have liked that," he managed finally. "She always said warmth was meant to be shared." "Like your kindness that night," Ruth said softly. "I wasn't just testing the town, you know. I was testing myself, whether I could still trust simple goodness after everything." Lily reached over and touched the hat's soft brim. "Dad says Mom's love is like a warm hat. It still keeps us cozy even when we can't see it." Ruth blinked rapidly, reaching for her water glass. Before she could respond, Evelyn's voice rang out across the hall. "Choir members, places, please." The children scrambled to the front of the room, Lily giving her father a quick hug before joining them. As they assembled, Ruth slipped away briefly, returning just as the first notes began. The hymn, the one Lily had helped write, filled the hall with harmony. Words about light in darkness, about hands reaching out to lift others up, about mercy flowing like a river through a town's heart, rose to the rafters. Near the bulletin board, Ruth quietly pinned up a small piece of paper, one of Lily's signature good news notes. But this one was different. In Ruth's elegant handwriting it read, "This town changed a tire on my heart." Our Caleb spotted it first, a chuckle escaping him. Others noticed too, and soon laughter rippled through the crowd, mixing with happy tears as the choir's last note faded away. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake catching the light from the warm windows like tiny stars coming home. Through the window, the Maple Lightworks building glowed against the darkening sky, its solar panels dusted with white, while inside the church hall, a community that had chosen kindness over fear shared warmth, food, and the simple miracle of belonging. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.